Hey guys, this is Bear Wire, and I'm coming here with a Leakfinder video for Diogo Franco. It looks like he's playing a 200 deep stack against who I recognize as a reg. He's not someone that I actually know his stats or anything like that, but I guess those are his stats. I don't know how this stuff works. Well, whatever. I'm just going to go ahead and watch this for the first time. I know it's been a while since my last video, and this isn't even really a video. Oh. Just noticing the chat. I guess this is a reg who doesn't like getting sat. He's going to have to deal with it for now. But, yeah, I'll talk about myself later. For now, I'm just going to comment on Diogo's play, because this is, after all, for his benefit. He was kind enough to let all of you at HUSNG.com view his Leakfinder, because he didn't feel like he was playing so well in this video. So, facing an early 3-bet, I think that defending here is pretty standard. This is kind of weird off the bat. I don't know. I mean, against a reg, I like to know at least a little bit about how he tends to play, because regs are. I guess I'm saying that regs, there's a pretty big disparity between how different regs play. For example, aggro regs and tight aggressive regs and loose aggressive regs and regs who bum hunt and only play fish. They all play pretty dramatically different strategies, against some of whom defending ace-3 suited could be terrible, and against other ones it could be extremely standard. And against some of them you would want a 4-bet bluff with this hand. So it's kind of difficult, and early in a match, as much as my self-control likes to think otherwise, this is probably a fold pre-flop, but I don't hate the play. And once we get a pot-size c-bet, this just becomes a really interesting hand right off the bat. I think that, assuming that he's a thinking regular, which it seems like he is, there's just no good reason he should be bluffing for this size. And if he's never bluffing for this size, then our hand is pretty much dead in the water. Obviously, we hit gin here on the turn, but this is a pretty strange situation on the flop, in my opinion. I actually think that a fold is best. There's a lot of money behind, but even on an ace turn card, we can't really expect to have great implied odds, because if you think about his value range on the flop, well, when he pots it, I expect him to have a pretty strong value range on the flop. Jacks or better should comprise a pretty large portion of his range. So even when we hit an ace, it's going to be hard for him to continue. I mean, maybe he'll at least, maybe he'll check call once with jacks through kings here, and then probably check fold the river. But I think that, first of all, we only hit this turn card, this turn card or a 3, we only hit that about 10% of the time. So the rest of the time we're left with the majority of blank turn cards and also heart turn cards, which are, they're good for us, but facing another big bet, we're probably just burning more money against his range. The fact that he check folded here makes me think that he was bluffing on the flop, and possibly he just decided to pot it with something like 7-8 of hearts, just because he thought that a pot-size c-bet would look scary with no history. But honestly, that's just what it does look like to me. It looks terrifying. But I'm assuming that, well, I don't know. This guy just might not be very good at all. He might be, I literally know nothing about him. I've seen VSD in the lobbies before, and I think those are his stats laid on the screen. I'm not really familiar with this HUD, so I have no idea what that is, but it looks like he's a winning player. So, and it looks like he knows that we're a reg. So I just have no idea what to make of that. Really strange all around that not only he pots it on the flop there, but then the very next hand he makes it 70 pre-flop. It just seems like he's kind of tilty and kind of, I don't know, maybe just really bad. Really spazzy. Likes to be, I don't know, kind of creative. So I think that the flop here is actually a somewhat interesting decision given the recent dynamic. We just forced him off of his hand in the previous 3-bet pot. Obviously, he doesn't realize that we had 2 pair there. So right now, he's sort of trying to, in my opinion, I would imagine that, you know, operating under the assumption that he's kind of flashy and likes to show people up, which is my impression of seeing a pot-sized c-bet and then 3.5x and, you know, his chat and all sorts of things. It seems like he's sort of prideful. I would expect when he bets 120 on the flop here that he really almost never has a beat, because he just potted it like 2 hands ago and we didn't fold. I have no idea why he would not pot it again if he had gin here. So when he doesn't pot it here, I'm really inclined to raise. It's a thin value raise, given that we're this deep. But like against him in particular, I just feel like he's very likely to pot it here again if he has anything really strong. And he would even probably pot it here with like his big draws that he's planning on running a multiple street barrel with. So it's really my opinion that we should be raising the flop here just to kind of like keep him frustrated. Because even if he folds, it's really not that bad for us because like him being frustrated is a great thing for us. It's sort of like when we got hit with the deck early here, we can kind of take advantage of momentum and just kind of, you know, take aggressive lines with what's very likely to be the best hand. And him folding, like I said, is not the worst thing in the world because it will give him it will keep up this illusion that we're like running him over, when in reality we're just kind of, you know, running well. I don't really like a turn raise here. It's fine to keep it small and sort of just give him a decent price to peel with draws, but I think it's very unlikely that we're going to... Wow. I'm really curious what he had here. Hopefully we get... Oh. What was that? I think I saw ace-5. I'm absolutely terrible with Camtasia, so I don't actually know how to... Okay, perfect. I don't know how to rewind yet, and I keep telling myself that I'm going to look up how to rewind during voice narration. But anyways, so on the flop here, I guess my assumption that he didn't have a big hand has yet to be disproved. His small c-bet just gave me the impression that he didn't have a very big hand, and I thought that with the dynamic raising the flop would be good to just get value out of everything that's worse, sort of represent a draw. And at the same time, we just kind of continue to take aggressive lines to keep him frustrated. On the turn here, I should explain further. I don't really like raising because when he bets 120 again, I think that sort of furthers the idea that... Well, I guess I shouldn't say I don't like raising. I just don't think that we have many good options here. It's possible that raising is the best play simply because we can force him to put more money in the pot when he has a draw. But like I said earlier, I didn't really think he had a draw here because of his bet sizing on the flop. I thought that he would normally pot it. And I don't think he would go for like that small bet sizing on the turn again. It's still possible that raising is the best play, just because he might not expect us to... what am I trying to... I really think it's difficult for us to represent a bluff here, but at the same time, he's shown to be kind of spastic, and he doesn't seem to be playing very well, given this like wide variety of bet sizing he's been making. And I'm trying not to be too results-oriented here because he peeled our turn raise with ace-5, which I think is very unusual. I do think he would normally have a tough time folding with something like 9s through queens, which is the majority of the time what I would expect him to show up with when he calls our turn raise, which is actually, you know, it's probably not that terrible for him to be playing his hand the way he did, because I mean, a lot of people would raise a king on the flop, and also just everything bricked off on the river. So when we bet kind of big on the river, we're sort of polarizing our range. Certainly, we can never have worse for value than ace-5. So the ace is a pretty irrelevant card. It's just a blank, really, for both of us. But that said, I think that raising the flop was the best play, and I think that on the turn we have a close decision between calling and raising, simply because I think if he's bluffing with a no equity hand given his bet sizing. And if he's value betting thin. So I think that raising sort of gives him the best chance to get away from his hand, whereas flat calling again will let him value cut himself on the river, and then we can put in a raise and represent missed draws on blanks. But that said, I mean, it worked out, and I'm not as strongly against it as I was when I first saw it. But I do think that flatting the turn has a lot of merit given what we saw about his bet sizing. So this is really strange. I didn't actually see what happened pre-flop here, but given stack sizes, I would very rarely be flatting sixes out of position. I assume what happened here is that it looks like what happened is that he 3x'd it and we flatted, and I think that's really bad. I think that what we should be doing pre-flop here, and I'm certainly not a short stack expert by any means, but I think that at 30 big blinds, defending with sixes is almost certainly worse than jamming over his 3x, because he's risking a very large percentage of his stack by 3xing, and given the fact that he's lost a few big pots, I don't think we should assign any particular strength to his 3x. I think that his 3x could certainly just be tilted and weak. It could certainly be ace-3. It could certainly be king-5, and he might even call a jam with those hands. But regardless, I think that flatting is almost certainly worse than jamming here with basically any pair, except for possibly aces or kings. I might slow play those hands, but I think that with sixes we should really be jamming pre-flop here. On the flop, I think with the bet sizing that we've seen from him, we've seen him pot with a bluff, we've seen him bet small with a thin value hand, and then he pots it here again on the flop. So pretty much he has a polarized range. He has draws in his range, and he also has aces in his range. It sort of makes it a difficult spot. But I think that I think that on the flop here, I think he realized this on the flop, and I think that there's a strong case for folding on the flop. A couple reasons are that when you consider his 3xing range pre-flop, I know that I said I wouldn't put too much weight to it, but certainly he's more likely to have an ace in his hand than usual when he 3x's at 30 big blinds, unless he's just completely brain dead. He would be more likely to 3x a hand like ace-jack than he would be, for example, to 3x 7-9 of hearts. I think that's somewhat obvious. Secondly, we have a pretty bad hand as far as blocking his possible draws. We block 2 sixes, we also block the 6 of hearts, so that removes a lot of possible combo draws from his range. So it's far less likely that he has, it's impossible for him to have anything like 6-7, 6-8, 6-3 of hearts. Every straight draw is less likely because of us having sixes. And like I said, I don't think he would ever value bet a hand worse than an ace this way. So we're up against a polarized range where his draws are somewhat hard to make given what happened pre-flop and given our hand. So I think that folding the flop is the correct play. But once we get this exact turn card, this card is pretty much perfect for us to get it in on, because it makes it less likely that he has an ace and also all of his draws missed. So I do think that your play was correct once we saw this turn card, but I don't think we should be getting to the turn here, given all of those things that I mentioned. I think that we should just be folding the flop. Like I said, but like I said earlier, I don't think we should ever be seeing the flop, because I think we should be jamming pre. So a lot of things happened in that hand that I would not normally see. So yeah, now he's min-raising, and I don't know if that's a result of him not being tilted anymore, but to me that just sort of implies that his 3x was because of his hand strength. So that's something noteworthy to me. I would have made, and now he's 3xing. So yeah, I mean, to me this just means that he has multiple raise sizes, and it's entirely possible that they're based on his hand strength. So I would be taking careful note of that, especially if I was one-tabling. So he has 3-bet us quite a few times in a short period here. We've seen him 3-bet ace-5 suited earlier on. So I'm not totally convinced that folding ace-8 is correct. I think that it's probably a defend against him. If hands like ace-5 suited are in his range, that sort of diminishes like the domination effect of him 3-betting all of his ace-jack, ace-queen, ace-king hands. It doesn't totally eliminate it, but keep in mind we're getting a price in position. By the way, I don't think that we should be 3xing against him at this point in the match. We just 2.5x'd it earlier in the match. Or, not earlier in the match, literally 2 hands ago, we 2.5x'd it, which would be my standard against him, because of how often he's 3-betting. But then we pick up ace-6 offsuit, like right after getting 3-bet, and then we 3x it, and that just doesn't make any sense to me. We should really be 3xing more often against like fishy players who defend too often and don't really 3-bet us a lot, and against a guy like this who's 3-betting us pretty much relentlessly, we should be pretty inclined to make it 2.5x or even a min raise, so that we can defend wider and so that we lose less chips when we raise fold. So I believe that's his first limp. Raising queen jack is extremely standard. Plays very well against what I would imagine his limping range is. I've seen actually a lot of players recently limp calling hands as weak as like queen 2 offsuit. Even some winning regulars, as surprising as that is to myself. So definitely going to be raising queen jack there. So yeah, now that the blinds are up at 1530, I would just be min raising everything I wanted to open against this guy, and I'd probably open queen 6. I mean, sure he 3-bet us a couple times early, but he showed down with, you know, a pretty playable hand. So I don't think that he's completely nuts. I just think that he, I think we had a pretty strange dynamic in the first, like, 5 or 10 hands of this match. So now we, So this is kind of interesting to me that it seems like here you have a couple different raise sizes at the same stack depth, and I'm not really certain why that would be necessary, especially just like given. I mean, you just min-raised 8-6 suited and then 2.5x ace-7 suited. I think those hands like really play somewhat similarly, except for the fact that ace-7 suited blocks a couple of his strong hands, so I guess he's less likely to have a big hand. As far as king-queen suited goes here, I think it's actually like pretty close between defending and 3-betting against a lot of players, and he just folded to a 3-bet a couple of hands ago, which I guess makes me slightly more likely to flat it. But at the same time, it makes me like, if he's someone who adjusts, perhaps over-adjusts to the way that we're playing. There's plenty of people who like don't like folding to 2 3-bets in a row, so the second time they get 3-bet, they just, you know, defend too wide, or they 4-bet bluff too often, or whatever. That said, I think, you know, since we don't really know that much about him, I think defending is like the safer play. I think defending, I'm not totally convinced that defending 7-5 off is profitable, but I'm sure that most people like to, and I would certainly check raise that flop. I think that if we're going to attempt to profitably defend something like 7-5 offsuit, that was like a perfect flop to check raise. I mean, he did c-bet 3/4 the pot, which is a little intimidating, but he just did it like 2 hands ago and we folded when we had king-queen on the ace-high board. So I don't think that him doing it again should really alarm us. We've seen him c-bet full pot, we've seen him c-bet, 1/3 pot, all sorts of stupid crap, so I don't think that that should really deter us from check-raising there. We have a pretty good draw with 7-5 on 8-4 deuce, and I think that there's just a lot of like total air that he can bet fold there, like queen high, king high. A lot of those hands interpret that board as a good board to c-bet, so we should really be attacking it somewhat wide, and I think 7-5 has plenty of equity to check raise there. And I think that we represent enough hands to credibly check raise there, just because we can be defending all sorts of eights, so we can just have a ton of top pair hands that want to check raise there and get it in on a two-tone flop. So I really think that we should be check raising that board, especially against him, who has been pretty aggressive in general. Here my default play is to check back, and the general idea for that is that pretty much anything that continues on this board is going to have very good equity against pocket twos. We can't really, basically my idea is that if we get called here, there's no way that we're ahead of his range. We're certainly behind his calling range here with twos, so I guess technically that would make this a bluff, which is kind of bad because pocket twos have very little equity in general. So this is the type of hand that I personally would just try and take to showdown on this board. We're certainly going to be good at showdown against ace-high a decent amount of the time. People will happily check down something like ace-6 out of position on this board. So I think that our best play here is just to check down, because I don't think that betting really accomplishes that much. I think that and we should definitely be defending king-6 against a min-raise. But yeah, I just don't think that we accomplish that much by c-betting, except for we fold him off of a couple hands that have 25% equity. I don't know, maybe queen-6 suited or something that really didn't connect with the board but still has decent equity. But I don't think there's enough of those hands that that really justify c-betting, because he connects with king 7-9 pretty well with his defending range, I would imagine. So I don't think that the amount of hands that we fold out is actually worth the amount of money that we put in behind when he does have something, which in my opinion is pretty often. I also think that 3-betting with sevens, the last hand, is probably fine against him because he's not calling many c-bets. But it's certainly a hand that I would defend against most people. Here I'm okay with calling the check raise because it was small and there's not much he can represent. But I'm just not nuts about it. It's a hand that I probably wouldn't. It's a hand that I probably wouldn't c-bet all that often, but it's a pretty good board to c-bet. Wow, I'm amazed that he folded there. That's quite a fold. I guess it's possible we could be value betting with 4s through 8s or something. But yeah, this guy seems pretty interesting. Anyways, I think folding a6 against a 3x is standard, although against a min-raise I would be defending. His sizing was small enough that I would be peeling there with king high because of the fact that it's a dry board and that he can have total air, but we don't even have a diamond in our hand, and if he's check raising with any sense of what he's doing, he's going to be doing it with hands that have decent equity against king 5 offsuit. If he has king high, he's probably not check raising because he should just check call. If he has I don't know, 7 high, no diamonds, he's probably check folding because his hand is total garbage, but I don't know if he actually thinks that way, so anyways, I think that king-queen hand is pretty standard. Certainly you could make a case that the last time he potted he didn't have anything, but I just don't think that King Queen is a strong enough hand against like his 3-betting range to sort of try and like jam over his c-bet or float his c-bet there, because he could definitely be like bluffing in his mind with some hands that beat King Queen, and also just with hands that generally have good equity against King Queen. And he could also just have smacked the board, so I think I prefer a fold there. Definitely a good spot to c-bet. Just as a general comment, I think that like your idea of raising to different sizes pre-flop, just based on like what we want him to do against our hand, it's an acceptable idea to an extent, but I would just try and keep it in check, especially when we're like sitting regs and sort of trying to. I mean, I would imagine our plan is like to play this guy, more than once. I don't know if we're just sitting him just to like make him leave the lobby or something, but I would imagine that over time, we can't really expect to sit this guy like for an extended period of time and have him not realize that the only reason we're changing our sizes is because we have a different hand. I don't think that we actually gain that much EV by changing our open size to 100 instead of 80 when we have like A7 instead of 8-6. Because like honestly, in position against his defending range, we're going to be making profit with those hands from pretty similar situations, like just c-betting and taking it down and stuff like that. They're both going to have pretty similar value. And we also, in both cases, aren't really excited about getting 3-bet, so I don't think there's any strong advantage to putting more money in the pot with A7 versus 8-6 when facing a 3-bet. We're in the same sort of bad situation. As far as this hand goes, I think that leading the turn and river is pretty standard. I think your sizing was fine as well. I think that sizing will get looked up by like an 8 or a 9, at least a reasonable percentage of the time, given that hearts missed. But I don't see. It doesn't look like you have a HUD up, but I think that this hand is a jam against him. Just like based off my mental estimate of how often he's 3-betting, I would imagine that folding ace-9 here is pretty exploitable. I'm not crazy about defending just because like he's going to pot a bunch of flops, and we don't really want to take a flop with a hand like ace-9. It just plays really well pre-flop and not all that well post-flop, especially when he's 3-betting hands like ace-5 suited. He's going to be making some pretty bad mistakes against us pre-flop by like 3-betting those hands and then folding them. I just think that there's enough worse hands in his pre-flop range that we should be jamming there. And you did jam, so that's awesome. But it would be nice if we had some stats on him, obviously, but it's not the end of the world. I think that we can just kind of gauge off a rough estimate that was a pretty easy jam. I sort of lost track of what I was getting at, but I'm pretty sure my idea is clear that I don't see a strong reason to raise to different sizes pre-flop against someone we're going to be playing more often, and we're not really certain that he's going to react all that differently. Rather that he's not going to react all that differently against a fishier player, and. Like, really, I don't know that much about short stack play, but I just hate limping these hands. I mean, like, that's just me. I don't know. Like, there's probably, like, honestly, as far as I know, there might be, like, other videos on this site that advocate limping those hands, but I just think it's terrible. I can't think of any good reason to do it. Like, that hand flops terribly. I'm sure all of your profit from playing that hand in position comes from bluffing. So, like, giving him a free flop just doesn't really make sense to me at all. If we were like 10 big blinds deep or something and we just didn't want to risk 2 big blinds, that would make more sense to me, but at 30 big blinds I just really don't understand why we'd want to limp into the pot with a hand that plays horribly. Whereas earlier, like limping in with 5-4 suited makes perfect sense to me, because it's a hand that is like marginal against a 3-bet. So we don't really want to get 3-bet at 30 big blinds, where like defending is pretty marginal with something as bad as, or rather something that doesn't have high card value. So 5-4 suited like totally makes sense to me to limp at 30 big blinds. But like Queen Jack suited makes sense to raise because we can call a 3-bet at 30 big blinds. But Queen 3 offsuit, I just don't understand. Like, there's no way that we're not like raising Queen 3 offsuit and then being upset when we get 3-bet, because like that hand is total trash. So we don't mind getting 3-bet when we have Queen 3 offsuit. So I just don't see any reason to like see a cheap flop with that hand. It doesn't really add up to me. Although obviously there are advantages to seeing a cheaper flop with that hand if he's like very rarely folding to min raises, and or perhaps like if he's I would just fold this hand against a min raise. I don't think that there's enough money behind to make any sort of play at this pot with close to no equity. I mean, we have like a very small amount of equity, but I just don't think that there's enough room to make some sort of play at that pot. If we were at starting stacks, it's certainly a spot that I would consider 3-bet bluffing, just because he's not representing a whole lot with his sizing on that particular board. I think that raising with ace-3 on that board is a little bit thin. I know that his bet sizing sort of indicates that he has like a marginal value hand, but I think that if that's the case, I would rather flat and then lead specific turn cards that aren't bad for our hand, because our equity, like if he's only continuing with hands like pair plus straight draw and then better hands than ace-3, then our equity isn't really all that great. I think it's a pretty large assumption to make that he just never min-bets the flop with like 2-pair, never min-bets the flop with like ace-8. Those are all hands that are like obviously never folding and also have us completely crushed. So I'm not crazy about raising that thin for value in a spot where it's pretty hard for us to represent a bluff. If it was like a little less connected, then it would be okay because it would be easier for us to represent a bluff. But it's sort of difficult in that spot, in my opinion, and I think I would rather call. Whereas, like perhaps ace-10 and better becomes a pretty easy value raise. I'm like totally losing track of these general ideas I'm trying to say, because I keep like watching the next hand. So I'm gonna need to work on my like mental thought process during these videos. I think I was talking about limping. Well, maybe I wouldn't lead this turn. The turn is a decent spot to lead, but a lot of his flop checking range is going to include ace-high. So it's certainly possible that he checks back so many ace-highs on the flop that leading the turn won't be profitable, even with the draw. I guess if we had like a bigger draw, it would be totally fine, but 9-7, I guess the 9 and the 7 aren't really outs against his calling range, so I think the check folding is fine on that card. A king I would lead, and a queen I would lead, but I guess an ace hits his range a little bit too hard. I do think that, I mean, king 3 is a little close, but I do think that you're folding too often against min raises. I think that like something like king 3 is probably either a call or like a 3-bet, depending on who you're playing. Against him in particular, I think I would just call with it. He hasn't, like he has, I actually don't remember what he did against our last 3-bet, but I do seem to remember that he has like a variety of pre-flop sizes, and I think that the min raise is probably the weakest of those sizes. Anyways, I think that your check raise here is fine. It's a relatively dry board that we can take advantage of because we have a lot of kings in our range. and because we have the backdoor draw, that makes it a pretty good spot to bluff. The river pretty much sucks, and I do think it's close between checking and jamming, mainly because I think that there's a reasonable amount of kings in his range that would get it in before the river. So once we get to the river, I think it's pretty difficult for him to... I shouldn't say it's difficult for him to have a big hand, but like the 3 shouldn't really help him, because I would imagine he folds most of his like naked 3s on the turn unless he had like ace 3 with the ace of clubs. But I would think like at least some of his kings will get it in on the flop, and also his kings with a club will probably jam over our turn bet. So there's a pretty decent chance that he doesn't have anything better than like, you know, pocket 10s with the 10 of clubs or something like that. And that, coupled with the fact that the 3 is like considered a bad barrel card by most regs, I think there's a reasonable chance that jamming the river there is the best play. But it's certainly close, and I'm kind of interested in what he had when he decided to bet the river. Probably just had a flush, to be honest, but I think that given... I mean, he tends, like, in my opinion, he seems like someone who doesn't like to give up on pots very easily. So I would imagine that his range getting to the river is wider than most, like, you know, standard tight regulars. And also just the fact that, like, every hand that he peeled on the flop that picked up a club draw is not going to fold the turn. So he could certainly just have, like, ace high with 1 club. He could have, like, a 6 with 1 club. I think that makes it pretty close. So I think 3-betting here is fine. Defending would also be fine against a min-raise, but certainly we can 3-bet here. The flop is sort of an interesting spot, and I think that c-betting is the best play, because we actually sort of want him to... I shouldn't say we want him to fold hands like Queen-Jack, but betting against his Queen-Jack hands makes it sort of more difficult for him to play well against our range, or rather against our hand. This is kind of weird. Wow. I mean, I can't imagine folding here. I just don't really think... Like, I thought it was really strange how quickly he checked on the turn here. And in my like recent experience, I've seen a lot of sort of mediocre regulars like checking the turn here with an ace, which just makes absolutely no sense to me. I can't possibly understand why you would want to check an ace as villain here on the turn, but if he did happen to check an ace, he would certainly bet the river. The only thing is that I mean, the sizing is just really strange. Like, certainly it looks to him like we have nothing here. I would imagine that... I would just imagine that he has enough busted draws in his range. Like, the issue is that this sort of looks like a thin value bet with his sizing, because he's just been giving away sizing tells, like, the entire match. And he could certainly have something like 9-10 of spades or 9-8 of spades that just decided to value bet the river here, even though it's, like, extremely thin. Wow. But I just can't see myself folding this hand getting this price, because there's like a ton of missed spade draws that he can have, and like certainly he could be value betting a 9 here, but I don't think that many regs would do it. Like I think some of them would, but I can't say that it would be like the standard for a reg to bet like 9-7 here. I think that a lot of people would check that back. So like I think that we're really just looking at like a weird ace, and yeah, he had a weird ace. I mean, I think it's kind of strange that first of all, I think that his pre-flop defend is awful with ace-5 offsuit, and I would, like, the first thing I would do is I would make note of that, because, like, not only is that terrible, but that also puts a bunch of, like, offsuit combinations of aces are just, like, huge, because, like, obviously it's a lot easier to make an offsuit ace than it is to make a suited ace, so he now has, like, 3 times as many, or rather 4 times as many ace-5 combinations as, like, your average regular, because like someone standard would just defend ace-5 suited there, but he's defending all the offsuit combos also, which I think is really bad, especially against you, who you haven't really been 3-betting much at all. I can't really understand why he would want to defend that hand. Anyways, I think that that last hand was standard. And I think that you defending ace-5 here is way different for what it's worth, because he 3-bets a lot more than you do, and he also 3-bet to a really small size just now twice in a row, so you're getting a better price. So I just want to make it clear that like me bashing on him earlier for defending ace-5 is not the same as what the play you made just now, because your call is much more standard than his was. But anyways, I think that, you know, I would just make note that what I make out of that hand is that he didn't consider ace-5 to be a very big hand on that board, which is shocking to me, because if I was making a habit out of defending ace-5, I would be like pumped every time I flopped an ace on a dry board. But he seemed to play it pretty slow for some reason. Like, he checked back the turn, which makes no sense to me. I guess he was just scared of getting check raised, which also makes no sense. He should be fine getting check raised there, unless he's just like really weird. I just don't really understand his line. And then he makes a small bet on the river, which to me means he thinks he's value betting thinly. Here I think it's close between calling and jamming. Like, I think that he folds kind of a lot, but at the same time I don't think he's folding anything better than, well, it's obvious that he's not folding anything better than ace-10. I think he's rarely calling something worse than ace-10, like maybe ace-9 or king-queen he would call. But I think that calling is like a reasonable option, because ace-10 just plays really well, and because he went with a smaller sizing that actually leaves effective stacks like somewhat deep. Like, we're only at 30 big blinds, but he made a 4 big blind 3-bet. So the stack to pot ratio is like over 3-to-1, which is a pretty favorable spot for us, really. So I think that's a close situation pre-flop, but, you know, given his frequency of 3-bets and given the fact that we've seen him fold before, jamming is probably like somewhat better. I'm just not totally convinced that, like, basically I just think that, like, the way he plays post-flop is pretty poor. So I think that we're going to be doing somewhat better than average by calling, whereas, like, against a somewhat tough player, like, jamming would be a no-brainer just because he has a high 3-bet frequency. Here, I would probably bet the flop, to be honest, because I think that when he checks here, he just has ace-high a lot, and he's going to be, like, pot controlling it. I don't think he's going for a check raise on jack 6-4 very often. So I think that, like, on the flop, I would just make a small bet, and I would just make a 3-barrel for, like, on just a ton of cards. I would just 3-barrel all the time. Here, as played, it's good. I might go a little bit bigger on the river just to make sure he folds, like, ace-king or, like, pocket 5s or whatever. But I think that you need to 2-barrel there, definitely. Like, I would not bet once on that board. With 10-8 there, I mean, it's okay to bet, but it's pretty hard for him to have anything, really. Like, he limped and he didn't bet the flop. It's, like, really hard for him to have anything. So I don't know that I would actually, and I would jam here. I wouldn't make a small 4-bet. Like, something noteworthy is that he 3-bet larger than usual here. He was making it 240, like, every time before, and then here he made it 300. So I think he's more likely than usual to have, like, ace-queen or ace-jack, or, like, king-queen or something that he's going to call off. I was wrong about that, I guess, but I do think he's more likely to have it. So I definitely think that we should be jamming there rather than small 4-betting, because I think that his calling range of, like, a small 4-bet and a 4-bet jam is going to be really similar. So we want to take advantage of that. On the flop here, I think the check calling is, I think it's fine, really. Like, it sucks that we have to check fold the turn, but, like, he hasn't been giving up easily against our check raises, and also I just don't think that he's, like, I don't think all that frequently we get into, like, a situation where he's 2-barreling us light. I think that that's a board that pretty often gets c-bet once and then, like, and then people give up. And this is sort of an interesting line by him. I think this is his first donk bet. And I think that really like every option is somewhat viable here. I mean, calling becomes less viable because of his sizing, but I think that when he sizes it bigger here on the turn, he represents fewer hands because he's already shown that he sort of like changes his sizing based on how thin of a value bet he thinks he's making. So if he was like leading the flop here with, I don't know, for example, Queen 7 or like 6-4 of spades or something, I don't think he would go for a big turn bet. I think he would go for a small turn bet. So like knowing that when he makes it 3/4 pot on the turn, he's representing something like maybe Ace-7 or Ace-8, or he's representing like a flop set, a flop straight, something like that. Pretty big hands in general. So, you know, us having Jack-9, we're kind of in a bad situation because against his value range, our Jack and a 9 are no longer outs, in my opinion. I don't think that he would make any value bets there with something that could lose to a Jack or 9 river. So knowing that, we just have a 4-outer. So folding is probably best. The interesting decision, in my opinion, is the flop. I think that raising the flop is the best play, namely because I think that his first donk bet is pretty unlikely to be like a thin value bet. That's like, I think that I explained in one of my earlier videos. I don't know if like you or whoever's watching this has seen all of them, but I explained that like I think that a good donk betting range includes hands like top pair and also draws on this board, and for that reason, like top pair can call a raise and then become a bluff catcher. I don't think he's actually going to be doing that really. Just in my experience with like the regulars at these limits, I just think that for the most part, if they're donk betting here, they're like donking with the intention to donk 3-bet with like a set, or they're donking with like King 9 offsuit because they think it's cool. So I think that raising the flop is like a pretty good play because it's going to put all of his bluffs in a pretty bad spot. Probably just going to fold really. And we have a pretty high equity hand with Jack 9 of hearts. Like even if he donk calls, there's a lot of good turns for us that we can continue bluffing on. And there's also a lot of like, basically, we don't really like, we don't have like this huge draw where like if he 3-bets us, we like, you know, we're hating life and folding. Like he's going to be 3-betting us with hands that have us like completely crushed. He's not going to be like donk 3-betting, I don't know, 10-8 here or something. At least I don't think so. So I would imagine that when he 3-bets here, he's like, we didn't really lose that much given the price of our bluff. I mean, he made it 80, we make it like 260 or something. We're not really losing that much. And the times that he is 3-betting us, I just think that's like pretty rare because I think that essentially means that he has like a set or something. So that said, I don't think there's even really that much reason for him to be donk betting into us with a big hand because we've been c-betting a lot and he's been getting the opportunity to check raise like light. So I would imagine if he's like thinking about balance or anything somewhat closely related to balance, he would realize that like check raising is something that rather that he can check raise and look light. So there's no reason for him to lead with a big hand here when he can check raise and look light. So I would imagine that like if he's even remotely thinking, he would check raise here with a big hand. So I think that we should, yeah, I mean basically I just think that we should raise the flop and shut down his bluffs. And I really don't even, like having said all that, I really don't even mind raising the turn here. Just because I think that that sizing is quite polarizing, and I think that he could certainly still have some bluffs. The only issue is that if his bluff is a big enough draw that he can call a raise, which is definitely a viable issue, which is one of the reasons why I tend to fold here. But I would hate, or rather I wouldn't hate raising the turn that much, given all the factors that I just said about why he probably is bluffing on the flop. Also, I do think that this is somewhat of a strange call pre-flop. Like if I wanted to describe like hands that I would 3-bet bluff and hands that I would defend, like I would certainly take the 5-6 suited that you bluffed with earlier and defend it, and then take this 3-5 suited and bluff with it. That might seem arbitrary, but like if you're regularly defending with hands that are worse than some of your 3-bet bluffs. That just doesn't really make sense. Like, that you're just not really building your ranges all that well. If you're not, like, if your 3-betting bluffs are actually better than some of the hands you defend, I would call a c-bet with ace-7 there. We very often have the best hand, and it's just an extremely dry board. He's been c-betting, from what I can tell, close to 100% in that situation. So I think that we should definitely be peeling at least one street. Depending on the turn card, we can pick up equity, and we might even be able to call again. But yeah, I would definitely be calling there. Given recent history, I would just fold this hand. And I guess that seems... Well, I guess I called it well. Because he just hadn't 3-bet in a long time, and then he snapped 3-bet. He made it 400 instead of... He made it 400 instead of... 5 big blinds instead of 4 big blinds. It just... I don't know. Something about his timing and everything just sounded... It seemed extremely strong to me, so I would have just folded. And I promise I wasn't looking at the track finder to realize this was the last hand of the match. I actually just felt like this was a really confusing time for him to be 3-bet bluffing. So it just seemed like he picked up a big hand, which I guess was right. But anyways, I do think that he played pretty well throughout this match. And I touched on all the little weird things like different raise sizes pre-flop that I think can be less than great, and just a few hands that were a few hands that I was sort of nitpicking at, really. But overall, I think that he was just playing quite poorly, and you really just well, outside of this hand, I believe that my comments should imply that I was going to play a lot of hands the same way. So good game and good luck.